Richard slammed the brakes and roared, "Get off now, or I won't ask twice." In that split second, as every face turned in stunned silence, the bus became the stage for secrets that would soon shatter lives and reveal a legacy no one expected. Before diving into this gripping tale, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring stories like this one. The day began with a heavy, humid heat that blanketed the city in a soft, shimmering haze. Early morning light struggled through the dense urban canopy of concrete and glass, casting shifting patterns of gold and shadow along the busy sidewalks. The city's pulse was already audible in the low rumble of distant traffic, punctuated by the occasional blare of a horn or the soft murmur of early commuters. Every breath carried the smell of diesel and fresh bread from the nearby bakeries, a blend that was uniquely the city's own. On a worn-out street near a bustling transit hub, a weathered bus rumbled to a stop. Its paint, once a proud shade of deep blue, now wore the patina of many years of service. The door hissed open, releasing a gust of warm, recycled air into the crisp morning. Behind the wheel sat Richard Coleman, a man whose steady hands had long learned the rhythm of the road. He had driven this route for as long as anyone could remember, a route that wove through neighborhoods of bright storefronts, narrow alleys filled with secret stories, and expansive avenues that stretched into the unknown. Richard's eyes, a soft shade of hazel, often betrayed the calm he tried to maintain. Today, though, there was a tension lurking beneath his practiced exterior. He adjusted the worn leather cap on his head and took a long, measured breath, as if the act of inhaling could steady the unresolved conflicts in his mind. Every morning was a struggle between duty and the memories of decisions made in the past, choices that sometimes brought unexpected consequences. As the bus's engine rumbled softly, Richard's thoughts drifted to the day ahead, a day that, unknown to him, was destined to twist his life in ways he could not yet imagine. Among the early passengers boarding the bus was Marcus Johnson, a quiet man whose presence seemed to command a subtle kind of respect. Marcus moved with deliberate calm, his steps measured and his gaze introspective. His dark eyes, deep and thoughtful, hinted at a mind that observed far more than he let on. Clad in a simple, well-worn jacket and carrying a battered leather satchel, he slid into an available seat near the back. The faint aroma of his cologne, a mix of cedar and spice, wafted gently, mingling with the sense of the bus's interior. Marcus was not a man of many words, but his silence carried a weight of unspoken stories and hidden truths. As the bus lurched forward, the city's vibrant tapestry unfolded outside the narrow windows. The streets were alive with activity. Street vendors calling out their wares, the chatter of pedestrians, and the persistent hum of the urban landscape. Richard's voice, measured and soft, occasionally broke the silence with brief greetings to his regulars. "Morning," he would say, his tone warm but edged with a fatigue that only years on the road could bring. Yet, even amidst the routine exchanges, there lingered an undercurrent of something unsettled, a tension that seemed to hover around the edges of the ordinary. For Richard, every day behind the wheel was a mix of responsibility and isolation. He remembered the day he first took this route, full of hope and a quiet determination to do right by his passengers. But the years had brought more than just wear and tear on the bus. They had also brought a hardening of the heart, a slow, steady accumulation of frustrations and prejudices. He had learned to keep his emotions in check. Yet there were moments when the past would flare up unexpectedly, stirring old resentments he wished to bury deep. The interior of the bus was a microcosm of the city itself, diverse, unpredictable, and filled with hidden stories. There were the young college students, their laughter echoing softly as they discussed dreams and ambitions, the elderly who sat silently, their eyes reflecting memories of a bygone era, and the workers whose faces bore the marks of long, exhausting days. In this swirling mix, Marcus sat quietly, absorbing the world around him with an intensity that made him seem both a part of the crowd and apart from it at the same time. As the bus made its way along its familiar route, subtle details in the scenery began to paint a larger picture. The graffiti on brick walls spoke of rebellion and hope. The flickering neon signs of small diners promised a refuge from the day's harsh realities, and the distant sound of a church bell lent a sense of continuity and solace. Every element of the scene was charged with meaning, a silent reminder that life was full of layers, both visible and hidden. Richard's thoughts wandered to his own family and the legacy that they carried. He had grown up in a modest household, far from the glitz of corporate power or the intricacies of business empires. His parents had worked hard, their lives defined by honest labor and quiet dignity. Yet, as he navigated the streets each day, a part of him felt a stubborn resentment toward the world of privilege that seemed to dictate one's fate without regard for merit or decency. It was a feeling he could neither fully explain nor easily dismiss, and sometimes it seeped into his actions in ways he would later regret. Marcus, too, was no stranger to the burdens of expectation and the weight of legacy. Though his demeanor was calm and his words few, those who looked deeply into his eyes might sense a silent defiance, a determination born from years of being underestimated and misjudged. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, as if he were constantly preparing for an inevitable confrontation with the prejudices of a world that saw him only as a stereotype rather than as a person of substance. His past was a mosaic of hardship and resilience, and while he rarely spoke of it, every gesture and every pause in his conversation hinted at a history more complex than the surface allowed. On this particular morning, as the bus wound its way through a labyrinth of busy streets and shadowed alleyways, a subtle tension began to build. The ambient noise of the city was punctuated by moments of silence that felt charged with the promise of change. Richard's grip on the steering wheel tightened ever so slightly as he recalled a recent encounter that had left him with a bitter taste, a moment when words unsaid had festered into a silent storm within him. He did not fully understand it, but there was an undercurrent in the city that spoke of hidden power dynamics and secrets waiting to be uncovered. At a busy intersection near a row of coffee shops and small independent bookstores, the bus paused as red lights blinked in rhythmic protest. Richard took a moment to glance at the passengers, his eyes briefly meeting those of Marcus. For a split second, there was an unspoken exchange, a flicker of something that passed between them, like the fleeting shadow of a secret too dangerous to name aloud. In that moment, the world outside the window seemed to slow down, as if nature itself were holding its breath. The city, with all its restless energy, appeared to whisper a quiet warning. Trust was fragile, and appearances could be deceiving. In the background, the hum of conversations and the soft clink of coffee cups created a lull that was almost meditative. A young woman in a bright scarf chatted animatedly with an older man, while a pair of teenagers giggled over shared jokes, their voices blending into the tapestry of urban sound. Yet, beneath the mundane chatter lay a sense of foreboding, as if each sound was part of a larger symphony orchestrated by fate. Richard's mind raced with questions he could not answer. Questions about loyalty, about the true nature of power, and about the unpredictable twists that life often took. He remembered the day his own life had taken an unexpected turn. A day when a simple act had cascaded into a series of events that forever altered his course. Even now, as he navigated the familiar streets, he could not shake the memory of that day. It was a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments held the seeds of extraordinary change. The thought lingered, a quiet refrain that played in the background of his consciousness, urging him to consider the consequences of every decision he made. Marcus, seated by the window and lost in his own reflections, noticed the way the light danced on the passing buildings, turning every moment into a fleeting masterpiece. He often found solace in the beauty of the everyday, a smile exchanged between strangers, the delicate pattern of raindrops on a window, or the vibrant energy of a busy street corner. But today, there was a heaviness in his heart that made him wonder if beauty was enough to overcome the injustices of the world. In the silence of his thoughts, he silently vowed that one day he would confront the forces that had long worked to keep him in the shadows of expectation and prejudice. As the bus rolled on, the narrative of the morning continued to unfold with an almost poetic inevitability. The scenery outside shifted from the chaotic energy of downtown to quieter residential streets, where the architecture told stories of generations past. Old brick buildings stood side by side with modern glass towers, their contrasting styles a visual metaphor for the merging of tradition and progress. In these neighborhoods, every crack in the pavement and every rusted rail spoke of lives lived in struggle, hope, and quiet determination. Richard's thoughts grew more introspective with each passing moment. He recalled snippets of conversations from earlier in the week, casual remarks that hinted at deeper resentments and unspoken biases. There was a tension in the air that he could not quite pinpoint, a sense that the city was on the verge of revealing secrets best kept hidden. In a brief exchange with a regular passenger at one stop, he had heard the man mutter something about the old ways clashing with new power, words that echoed in Richard's mind like a distant warning. He wondered if the forces of change were already at work, preparing to upend the delicate balance of power that had governed the city for so long. In the midst of these swirling thoughts, the bus hit a small bump in the road, jolting Richard from his reverie. For a moment, time seemed to pause as the interior of the bus trembled with the impact. A few passengers exchanged startled glances, while Marcus's calm expression remained unbroken, as if he had experienced such jolts many times before, each one a minor reminder of life's unpredictable rhythm. Richard's hand stilled on the wheel as he mumbled a quiet apology to the passengers, his voice tinged with a mixture of regret and resignation. There was something almost ritualistic about these moments, a reminder that life was composed of countless small events, each carrying the potential to alter one's destiny. The city, with its sprawling streets and hidden alleys, was a stage upon which human dramas unfolded daily. And on this particular morning, as the bus wound its way through the urban labyrinth, every turn and every stop was imbued with a sense of impending significance. Richard's internal conflict deepened as he recalled the pride and burden of his profession. He had once believed that driving a bus was a noble task, a way to connect with people and serve the community. Yet, over time, the monotony of the route and the weight of unspoken judgments had chipped away at that idealism. He had begun to see himself not as a guardian of the public trust, but as a mere cog in a larger machine, a machine that cared little for individual souls and more for the relentless march of routine. It was a thought that both comforted and tormented him in equal measure. As the bus continued its journey, subtle details began to hint at a larger story waiting to be told. A glimmer of something unusual caught Richard's eye, a well-dressed man standing at a corner, his expression unreadable as he watched the bus pass. The man's presence was striking amid the ordinary crowd, his tailored suit and calm demeanor setting him apart from the everyday hustle. Though Richard could not place it immediately, the man's gaze seemed to hold a message, as if he were silently observing events that were about to unfold. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, yet it added another layer to the morning's unfolding mystery. Marcus, too, seemed to sense that the day was not as ordinary as it appeared. As he glanced up from the book he had been reading, a tattered volume of poetry that had seen better days, he caught a glimpse of the well-dressed man in the reflection of a shop window. For an instant, Marcus's eyes widened, and a shadow of recognition, or perhaps a warning, passed over his face. He did not speak, but the moment was enough to stir something deep within him, a silent premonition that the forces at play in the city were far more complex than they appeared on the surface. The bus began to slow as it neared a familiar stop, one that lay at the edge of a neighborhood where the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of children playing. Richard eased the vehicle to a gentle halt, the screech of the brakes mingling with the ambient sounds of the morning. As passengers prepared to disembark, Richard's mind continued to churn with the day's unresolved thoughts. He was unaware that this seemingly mundane stop would soon mark the beginning of events that would challenge everything he believed about loyalty, power, and fate. In that quiet moment, the ordinary and the extraordinary converged. The soft murmur of departing passengers faded into the background, replaced by the silent promise of change. Richard glanced at the empty seat where Marcus had been sitting, his eyes lingering on the untouched book resting on the seat. There was an inexplicable pull, a subtle force that hinted at secrets buried beneath everyday life. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring to draw him toward a truth he was not yet ready to face. Even as the bus prepared to pull away, the tension in the air was palpable. Each small detail, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, the murmured greetings of the few remaining passengers, felt charged with meaning. Richard's heart beat steadily in his chest, each thump a reminder that even in the midst of routine, life was full of unexpected turns. He could not shake the feeling that he was on the brink of a discovery, one that would upend the familiar rhythms of his world. Without fully understanding it, Richard clutched the steering wheel a little tighter as he resumed the journey. Every road, every stop, seemed to whisper hints of betrayal and hidden truths. It was a morning that promised no simple resolutions, only the slow unraveling of layers built over years of quiet assumptions. And somewhere in the depths of that promise lay the first fragile seeds of change, a change that would eventually force him to confront the true cost of his actions, to question the nature of trust, and to face the unforeseen power hidden in the background of his everyday life. As the bus merged back into the flow of traffic, the city's vibrant mosaic continued to unfold around Richard and Marcus, each playing their small part in a grand, unfolding drama. The narrative of the day was still being written, its chapters yet unwritten, and every moment pulsed with the possibility of transformation. For Richard, the morning had become a canvas painted with shades of regret, hope, and the quiet anticipation of what was to come. And for Marcus, the silent observer whose eyes held stories of his own, the day was a reminder that true strength often lay hidden in the most unassuming forms. In the gentle cadence of the city, amidst the hum of engines and the murmur of voices, two lives had begun to intersect in ways that neither could predict. The bus driver, burdened with the weight of his past and the silent judgments of a society divided, and the quiet commuter, whose calm demeanor belied a history of struggle and the promise of unforeseen influence, were bound by fate in a moment that was as ordinary as it was extraordinary. Their paths, set on course by forces beyond their control, were about to converge in a twist that would shake the very foundations of their world. And so, as the city carried on with its timeless rhythm, with each street corner and each whispered conversation holding the potential for revelation, the stage was quietly being set. In the interplay of light and shadow, in the soft murmur of everyday life, the seeds of betrayal and redemption took root. Little did anyone know that the quiet morning, marked by routine stops and familiar faces, was also the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they thought they understood about trust, power, and the hidden ties that bound them all together. For now, the bus rolled steadily onward, carrying with it a quiet tension and the promise of change, a change that would soon reveal that every action, no matter how small, carried the weight of destiny. And as the wheels turned and the city whispered its secrets, the quiet questions of that morning echoed in the hearts of those aboard. What if every choice we make holds a hidden cost? And what if the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of emerging when we least expect it? In the soft glow of the rising sun, amid the murmur of a city awakening to its daily struggles and triumphs, the journey of Richard and Marcus began. A journey that, though it started with the hum of an engine and the clatter of city streets, was destined to become a testament to the fragile balance between prejudice and power, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. And as the bus continued on its course, the delicate interplay of fate and free will wove a tapestry of emotions and secrets that would leave a lasting mark on all who dared to look beyond the surface of their everyday lives. The bus rolled on, leaving behind the quiet familiarity of the residential streets for a more chaotic part of the city. Outside, the late morning light grew harsher, painting long shadows on cracked sidewalks and the rough surfaces of aging buildings. Inside, the air was thick with tension, a tension that had been building ever since that silent, meaningful glance exchanged between Richard and Marcus. The hum of the engine seemed to echo the heartbeat of the city, steady yet unyielding, as if warning that nothing would remain unchanged for much longer. As the bus wound its way through streets that pulsed with restless energy, Richard's mind churned with conflicting thoughts. The earlier moments of introspection were now mingled with an undercurrent of irritation that he could no longer ignore. Every bump in the road and every sharp turn felt like a reminder of the precarious balance he maintained between his professional duty and the personal demons he kept at bay. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his own tense expression, a furrowed brow, and a jaw set in determination. Yet there was something else in his eyes, a storm of pent-up anger that he struggled to control. Marcus, still seated by the window, sensed the shift immediately. His calm, reflective gaze turned cautious as he noticed the hardening of Richard's features. The quiet man, whose silence always spoke volumes, now wore an expression of worry. His fingers tightened around the book that lay open in his lap, the pages rustling softly in the stillness. There was an unspoken question in his eyes, as if he wondered if he had done something to provoke the change in the bus driver's demeanor. Yet he remained silent, letting the natural rhythm of the journey carry him forward. The bus entered a stretch of road lined with towering, modern structures that contrasted sharply with the older, crumbling facades of a neighborhood it had just left. The change in scenery seemed to mirror the internal shift in Richard. With every passing moment, the air in the bus grew denser with tension. A brief, offhand remark from a nearby passenger, a comment about the changing times and the new faces in the city, seemed to spark a reaction in Richard. His eyes flickered with something dark, a flash of anger that took him by surprise even as it surged within him. "Keep it down," he muttered abruptly, more to himself than to anyone in particular, though the remark carried an edge that did not go unnoticed by those around him. His voice, usually calm and measured, now rang out with an unexpected harshness. Marcus shifted in his seat, his expression guarded, yet he said nothing. The silence that followed was thick enough to be cut with a knife, leaving every passenger feeling the weight of what was about to come. As the bus slowed at another red light, the tension exploded into action. In a moment that seemed to stretch out forever, Richard's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles blanched white. A heated argument had been brewing in his mind, a mix of long-held resentments, personal insecurities, and a deep-seated prejudice that he had fought so hard to keep hidden. The memory of past encounters, of moments when he had felt dismissed and overlooked, surged forward with a vengeance. And now, facing the quiet, unassuming presence of Marcus, everything came crashing down. Without a clear warning, Richard barked, "Get off the bus now!" His command cut through the murmurs of the passengers like a jagged shard of glass. For a brief, shocking second, time seemed to freeze inside the bus. Eyes widened, and a collective murmur of disbelief swept through the compartment. Marcus's eyes, once so full of quiet understanding, now flashed with hurt and confusion. He rose slowly as if in slow motion, his face a mixture of shock and sorrow, and walked toward the door with measured steps. Every movement was heavy with the weight of betrayal. The door swung open with a hiss, and the cool air outside rushed in like an unwelcome intrusion, mingling with the warm, charged atmosphere within. As Marcus stepped out onto the busy pavement, the chatter of the city swallowed his quiet footsteps. He paused in the doorway, looking back at Richard, whose face was a tumult of conflicted emotions, regret, anger, and an almost imperceptible flicker of something else that resembled despair. In that split second, Marcus's eyes searched Richard's, as if pleading silently for an explanation, for an apology that would never come. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered among themselves, their voices trembling with disbelief and disapproval. "What just happened?" someone asked in a hushed tone, while others simply shook their heads, unable to reconcile the image of the gentle, caring bus driver they had once known with the man who had just ejected one of his own passengers. The atmosphere was electric with tension and uncertainty, and for a long moment, the bus was caught in a surreal pause, a snapshot of time where betrayal and anger hung in the air. Richard's hands trembled on the wheel. The words he had spoken now echoed in his mind, each syllable a reminder of a deep-seated prejudice he had tried so desperately to bury. His heart pounded in his chest, the rhythm erratic as guilt began to seep in. But even as regret whispered in the recesses of his mind, a stubborn pride, born from years of unspoken frustrations, refused to let him admit the truth. He kept driving, each mile a painful reminder of the irreversible act he had just committed. As the bus moved away from the stop, the cityscape outside seemed to shift its tone. The busy streets grew louder, the hum of conversations and the clatter of footsteps replacing the earlier calm. Richard's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was no longer on the familiar patterns of his daily route. Instead, he found himself spiraling into a torrent of memories and secrets, memories of whispered conversations and hidden documents that hinted at a truth he had long avoided. The names of people and places, once blurred by the passage of time, began to crystallize in his mind. There was talk, murmured in the background of family gatherings and hushed telephone calls, of a legacy and a fortune that was never spoken of openly. And now, in the midst of this heated turmoil, that hidden legacy began to resurface. A short time later, the bus came to a halt at a well-known transit depot, a sprawling building with glass walls that reflected the brilliant midday sun. Richard parked the bus in its designated spot, his body still trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. He sat for a few long moments in silence, staring at the dashboard as if trying to convince himself that the anger he had felt was justified. But even as he sat there, a nagging doubt began to creep in, unsettling him more than he cared to admit. It was then that a neatly dressed man, whose presence exuded authority and quiet confidence, approached the bus. His steps were measured, his expression unreadable behind a pair of dark, reflective glasses. The man introduced himself in a calm, measured tone. "Mr. Coleman, I'm here on behalf of the Transit Authority. We need to discuss an important matter with you." His words, though polite, carried a weight that made Richard's pulse quicken. There was an underlying urgency in the way he spoke, a hint that this meeting was no ordinary routine check. Reluctantly, Richard stepped out of the bus, his legs feeling heavy as if they carried the burden of a lifetime of suppressed secrets. The man led him through a series of corridors in the depot until they reached a modest office tucked away in a corner. Inside, the walls were adorned with framed photographs of buses and smiling employees, a stark contrast to the turbulence of the past few minutes. The man gestured toward a worn leather chair, and Richard sank into it, still feeling the sting of the morning's events. After a moment of heavy silence, the man slid a sealed envelope across the desk toward Richard. "This letter is addressed to you, Mr. Coleman," he said softly. "It contains information that you need to know regarding the ownership of this transit company." Richard's fingers hesitated over the envelope, as if he sensed that the contents would shatter the fragile reality he had constructed. With trembling hands, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The words that stared back at him were simple, yet they carried the power to upend everything he thought he knew. The letter explained that the transit company was not merely a job he had taken to make ends meet. In a twist that seemed too surreal to be true, it revealed that his family, the very family whose name he had never spoken of with pride, was the true owner of the entire operation. For years, Richard had believed he was just a humble bus driver, a cog in a machine that ran on routine and duty. But now, with the cold, hard truth laid bare before him, he felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him. The anger that had driven him to eject Marcus, the prejudice he had clung to, and the guilt he had tried to silence were now all magnified by this revelation. Richard's mind reeled as he tried to process the implications. The very act of discrimination, the violent outburst, and the subsequent betrayal he had committed were all tied to a legacy of power and privilege he had long denied. The knowledge of his family's true status was like a mirror held up to his soul, forcing him to confront the hypocrisy of his actions. As the shock of the revelation began to wear off, a new fury took hold of him, one that was not just personal, but born out of a deep sense of betrayal. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed his own anger to override the truth that his life was intricately linked with the institution he now served? The discovery left him with a bitter taste of regret and confusion. In that moment, he wondered if his outburst against Marcus had been less about personal prejudice and more about the shame of his own hidden identity, a shame that he had carried without even realizing it. Outside the office window, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the internal storm raging within Richard. The distant honks, the murmur of passing conversations, and the rhythmic clatter of footsteps all formed a backdrop to his inner turmoil. Every detail of the world around him seemed charged with meaning. He remembered moments from his past, small incidents, subtle comments, and the uneasy glances from colleagues, that now coalesced into a pattern he had failed to see. Each memory, once insignificant, was now a part of a larger tapestry of betrayal, hidden power, and the cost of ignorance. What would you do in this moment of betrayal? Richard's thoughts echoed, as if the city itself were challenging him to answer. The question, simple yet profound, hung in the air, forcing him to confront not only the incident with Marcus, but the very nature of his own identity. The betrayal was not limited to the passenger he had wronged. It extended to himself, to a life built on secrets and half-truths that now threatened to consume him entirely. Back on the street, as the office door closed behind him, Richard found himself standing at a crossroads. The revelation of his family's ownership was a turning point that left him questioning every choice he had ever made. With heavy steps, he returned to the bus, where the interior was now filled with a charged silence. The other passengers sat with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, each lost in their own thoughts about the morning's dramatic turn of events. In that quiet moment, the bus itself seemed to breathe, its engine a low, steady murmur that spoke of journeys both physical and metaphorical. Richard climbed back into the driver's seat, his hands now shaking not from anger, but from the weight of his new reality. He looked toward the door through which Marcus had exited, and for a split second, a pang of regret surged through him. Had he acted out of sheer hatred, or was it something more complicated? A misguided attempt to silence a part of himself he had long denied? The answer eluded him, hidden behind layers of emotion and the stark truth of his lineage. The rest of the day unfolded with a frenetic energy. Richard drove the bus along routes he knew so well, yet every familiar landmark now seemed to carry an undercurrent of foreboding. The streets, once a predictable tapestry of routine, had transformed into a landscape of symbolic reminders. Every stop, every turn, felt like a question being asked of him. How would he atone for his actions? Could he ever face Marcus again, knowing what he had done? And most painfully of all, could he ever reconcile the man he was with the man he was meant to be, a man born into power, yet chained by his own prejudices? Meanwhile, Marcus's absence from the bus sent ripples through the community of regular passengers. Whispers spread quickly among them, stories of a quiet man forced off the bus for reasons that many found hard to believe. Some expressed sympathy for Marcus, while others offered cold, judgmental glances in Richard's direction. In hushed tones, they debated whether the incident was a one-time lapse or a symptom of a deeper, more troubling reality. The bus, which had once been a vessel for simple daily commutes, was now transformed into a stage for a drama that questioned the very nature of trust and identity. On the streets outside, the city wore its contradictions openly. In one district, sleek modern buildings towered over quaint weathered shops. In another, vibrant murals depicted scenes of unity and struggle, a reminder that art and life were inseparable in this melting pot of hopes and hardships. Richard drove past these scenes with a numb awareness, each image a silent testament to the contradictions that lay at the heart of his own life. The revelation of his family's ownership was just one more contradiction, one that forced him to question whether he had ever truly known himself. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, the bus returned to the depot for a scheduled break. Richard parked in the designated lot, the vehicle now a silent repository of the day's escalating events. Inside the bus, the remnants of earlier conversations mingled with the heavy silence left by Marcus's absence. A young woman, whose eyes sparkled with quiet defiance, broke the silence with a tentative comment. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked softly, almost as if addressing an unseen audience. Her question hung in the air, a challenge and a plea wrapped into one, inviting everyone present to consider the possibility of redemption and change. Richard's heart clenched at the sound of her voice, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the lasting impact of betrayal. In that brief pause, the bus was filled with a collective yearning for answers. Answers that seemed as elusive as the shifting patterns of light on the pavement. Outside, the evening shadows lengthened, stretching like dark fingers across the city. It was as if the day itself were drawing a curtain on the chaos that had unfolded, urging everyone to reflect on the deeper truths hidden within the ordinary. For Richard, the night brought no solace. He sat alone in the empty driver's cabin, the quiet hum of the engine now a somber lullaby. The letter lay folded in the glove compartment, a constant reminder of the revelation that had shattered his previous understanding of himself. In the stillness of that moment, he replayed the events of the day, the angry outburst, the sight of Marcus's hurt expression, the shocking knowledge of his family's true identity. Each memory was a dagger, twisting in his chest as he struggled to piece together the man he had become. The internal conflict grew louder with every passing minute. Richard's mind oscillated between fury and remorse, each emotion battling for dominance. How did I let it come to this? He wondered, his thoughts spiraling into a maze of self-doubt and regret. The man he had seen in the mirror earlier, the bus driver who had always been just a part of the daily grind, was now confronted by a darker, more complex reality. The realization that his actions were intertwined with a legacy of power and prejudice left him feeling isolated and lost. In a final, anguished thought, he silently questioned whether redemption was even possible for someone who had strayed so far from the truth. Even as the night deepened, the city outside continued its relentless pulse. Streetlights flickered to life, illuminating patches of the pavement with a cold, unyielding glow. The soft murmur of distant conversations and the occasional roar of a passing vehicle formed a somber symphony that seemed to underscore Richard's inner turmoil. In those moments of solitude, he could almost hear the voices of the past, echoes of choices made, opportunities lost, and the quiet, persistent call for change. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small, persistent thought began to take shape. What if this moment, as painful as it was, could be the turning point he needed? The betrayal he had inflicted on Marcus was a wound that might never fully heal, but perhaps it could serve as the catalyst for a new beginning. The question lingered in the silence of a night, a fragile hope emerging amidst the ruins of shattered beliefs. What would it take for him to face the consequences of his actions, to seek out the forgiveness he had so long denied both himself and those around him? Outside the depot, the city seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting his next move. Richard's eyes, heavy with the weight of the day, slowly closed as exhaustion took over. Sleep, when it came, was restless, a tangle of vivid dreams and half-remembered memories, where faces merged and words lost meaning. In the depths of his sleep, a recurring image emerged. Marcus standing in the doorway of the bus, his expression a blend of sadness and quiet strength, silently urging him to confront the man he truly was. When dawn finally broke the next morning, it did so with an air of fragile possibility. Richard awoke with a start, the remnants of his troubled dreams fading into the gray light of early morning. The letter from the night before lay on the small table by his bunk, its presence a constant reminder of the secret that had upended his world. With a heavy heart, he prepared for the day ahead, each step measured and deliberate, as if he were walking a tightrope between his past mistakes and a future that now seemed uncertain. The bus was ready to resume its route, and as Richard climbed into the driver's seat once more, he carried with him the burden of his actions and the weight of a hidden legacy he could no longer ignore. The familiar sound of the engine starting was a bittersweet reminder of the routine he had clung to even as everything around him was changing. Now, every mile driven was a journey into the unknown, a quest for redemption, understanding, and perhaps, in time, forgiveness. As the bus pulled away from the depot, the morning sun cast long, shifting shadows along the pavement. Richard's thoughts drifted to Marcus, wondering if the quiet man had found a way to move forward despite the hurt inflicted upon him. The unanswered questions lingered. Would Marcus return? Could the wounds of the past ever truly heal? And most hauntingly, could Richard ever come to terms with the man he was meant to be, a man born into a legacy of power yet so deeply conflicted by his own failings? The city, in its endless motion, continued to offer no clear answers. Instead, it presented a canvas of fleeting moments, a street musician's soft melody, a mother's gentle laugh as she comforted her child, the distant hum of an approaching train, all of which served as quiet reminders that life went on, regardless of the storms that raged within. Each passing moment was a challenge, an invitation to choose, to wallow in regret, or to embrace the possibility of change. By midday, as the bus cruised along a busy boulevard, Richard's internal conflict grew more acute. The faces of passengers blurred into a mosaic of expressions, some sympathetic, others harshly judgmental, each reflecting a piece of his fractured identity. At times, he felt as though he were driving not just a bus, but the remnants of his own shattered self. The revelation of his family's ownership was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a mirror held up to his soul, revealing the complexities of loyalty, duty, and the hidden ties that bound him to a world he had never fully understood. In a moment of rare introspection, as the cityscape melted into a blur of color and motion outside the windows, Richard found himself asking, "What will it take to make things right?" The question was not directed at anyone else, but echoed deep within him, challenging every belief he had ever held. It was in that moment of vulnerability that he realized the journey ahead would demand more than mere apologies or silent regrets. It would require him to confront the darkest parts of himself and the legacy that had defined him from birth. The rest of the day passed in a haze of uncertainty and quiet determination. Richard began to notice small signs of change, a passenger offering a gentle smile, a brief nod of understanding from a regular rider, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered within him. The bitter taste of betrayal was slowly giving way to a dawning awareness that every moment, no matter how painful, held the possibility of transformation. In his heart, a spark of resolve began to form, urging him to seek out the truth behind his own actions and to find a way to repair the damage he had caused. As the bus neared its final stop of the day, the streets buzzed with the energy of a city that never truly slept. Neon lights began to blink on, and the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Richard pulled the bus over, his hands now steady as he prepared to end another day filled with turbulent emotions. In that quiet moment, with the soft murmur of the city in the background, he made a silent promise to himself that he would no longer allow the secrets of his past to dictate the course of his future. That evening, as the depot's doors closed behind him and he stepped out into the cool night air, Richard's mind raced with thoughts of redemption and the hard path that lay ahead. The weight of the day's events pressed on him, but within that burden he recognized a chance for change, a chance to confront the darkness within and perhaps, in time, mend the broken bridges between him and those he had hurt. The night offered no easy answers, only the quiet companionship of solitude and the gentle urging of distant voices, voices that seemed to say, "Remember, every betrayal carries within it the seed of a new beginning." And as Richard walked slowly through the deserted streets, his heart heavy with regret, yet stirred by a newfound determination, he could not help but wonder if, by embracing his true heritage and acknowledging the legacy he had long denied, he might one day find a way to heal the wounds of his past. The city around him was alive with whispers of possibility, a mosaic of broken dreams and fragile hope, all interwoven into the fabric of everyday life. In that tapestry, Richard saw both the pain of his actions and the potential for redemption. Each step he took was a quiet act of defiance against the cruelty of prejudice, a step toward a future where the mistakes of the past would no longer dictate the path ahead. In the soft glow of streetlights and the lingering hush of a troubled night, the unanswered question continued to resonate. What would you do in a moment of betrayal when the truth of your identity confronts you with the consequences of your actions? For Richard, the answer was as elusive as the shifting shadows on the pavement. Yet in that very uncertainty lay the promise of change, a promise that despite the scars of the day, tomorrow might offer a chance to begin again. And so, with the city as his silent witness and the echoes of the day reverberating in his soul, Richard embarked on a journey that would force him to confront not only the fallout of a single, fateful act, but the entire legacy of a life built on secrets, anger, and the bitter taste of regret. The rising action of his story, charged with twists and betrayals, had set him on a path from which there was no turning back. A path that would challenge everything he had ever believed about loyalty, identity, and the hidden ties that bind us all. As the night deepened and the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Richard knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with painful revelations. Yet, even in the midst of despair, a quiet determination began to kindle within him. The journey to redemption, he realized, was as unpredictable as the city itself, filled with unexpected turns, moments of bitter betrayal, and the promise of transformation hidden in every new sunrise. In that fragile space between night and day, amid the soft murmur of awakening streets and the lingering echoes of a shattered past, Richard silently vowed to face the truth of his existence head-on. The challenges of the coming days, the consequences of his actions, and the complex web of family secrets would all demand his courage. And perhaps, in the relentless pursuit of truth and forgiveness, he could find a way to mend the broken pieces of a life once defined by silence, prejudice, and the haunting specter of betrayal. The bus driver's journey had taken an unexpected detour, one that would reshape not only his own destiny, but also the lives of everyone who had been touched by the events of that fateful day. As the city stirred to life with the promise of a new day, the story of Richard and Marcus was far from over. Instead, it had only just begun to reveal the deep, often painful, truths that lay hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life, a tale of power, betrayal, and the enduring possibility of redemption that would linger in the hearts and minds of all who encountered it. Richard awoke to the chill of an early morning that felt both heavy and uncertain, as if the city itself were mourning the choices of the previous day. The memories of a tumultuous night haunted him, images of regret, anger, and the sharp sting of betrayal that had cut deep into his soul. He sat alone at a small diner near the depot, the soft clink of cutlery and the low murmur of other early risers, the only sounds accompanying his troubled thoughts. His eyes, still red-rimmed from a night of restless dreams, traced the patterns of steam rising from his untouched coffee cup. In that quiet solitude, the full weight of his actions pressed upon him. The hasty command that had ejected Marcus from his bus, the bitter discovery of his own privileged lineage, and the searing internal conflict between duty and deep-seated prejudice. Across town, Marcus had not simply vanished from the narrative of that fateful morning. Instead, he had begun a journey of his own, a quest for understanding and dignity after the humiliation he'd suffered. His steps had taken him far from the bus stop into a small community center where voices of hope and determination gathered in quiet defiance of the injustice he had experienced. There, amid a circle of kindred spirits and activists, Marcus listened to stories of discrimination and redemption, his own pain mingling with the struggles of others who had long fought against a system built on hidden power and selective loyalty. Even as he nursed his wounds, Marcus's calm eyes burned with a resolve to reclaim not only his self-respect, but also to challenge the injustice that had been thrust upon him. The day unfolded slowly, each moment steeped in tension and unspoken reckoning. In the heart of the city, a meeting was quietly being arranged, a convergence of the powerful and the overlooked, where long-buried secrets would be brought into the unforgiving light of truth. The board of the transit company, a cadre of well-dressed individuals whose polished smiles belied the complex history of their enterprise, had been alerted to the morning's events. Among them was Evelyn Carter, a woman whose steely determination and sharp intuition had often been the guiding force behind the company's public image. Evelyn had known Richard all his life. She regarded him not merely as an employee, but as someone who carried the family legacy in his blood, even if he had never embraced it fully. Now, as the evidence of his prejudiced outburst emerged, Evelyn and the others had convened in a tastefully appointed boardroom in a high-rise overlooking the city, determined to address the fallout with both gravity and resolve. Richard was summoned to that boardroom with little ceremony. The drive there was punctuated by his own turbulent inner dialogue, the roar of the city outside the window blending with the echo of his own doubts and regrets. He recalled the words Marcus had left unsaid as he stepped off the bus, the pleading look in his eyes that had haunted him ever since. Each mile drove home the realization that his actions were no longer isolated lapses of temper, but were instead symptomatic of deeper systemic failings that had been nurtured by a lifetime of unchallenged assumptions and inherited power. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The polished wooden table and the pristine walls seemed to amplify every sound. The measured footsteps of board members, the soft rustle of paper, and the steady ticking of a grand clock that marked the relentless passage of time. Evelyn's eyes, sharp and discerning, met Richard's as he took his seat. Her gaze was a silent admonition, a challenge to face the consequences of his actions. Beside her sat several others, including a man with a familiar air of quiet resolve. Marcus had been invited as a guest, an unexpected yet deliberate move meant to underscore the need for accountability and transformation. The room fell into a heavy silence as Evelyn spoke in a measured tone. "Richard, we have always believed in the values of this company, values that extend beyond mere service. We believed in fairness, in respect, and in the dignity of every individual who passes through our doors." Her voice did not waver, though the disappointment was evident. "This morning, you violated those principles. Your actions have not only hurt a valued member of our community, but they have also called into question the very integrity of the institution we all serve." Richard's hands, which had been clasped tightly in his lap, trembled as he struggled to find words that might excuse his behavior. For a long, heavy moment, he sat in silence, the truth of Evelyn's words settling around him like a shroud. Then, in a voice that was raw and unsteady, he began, I thought I was doing what was necessary. I was angry at a world that had made me feel invisible, angry at the expectations I never chose, and angry at the contradictions in my own life. I lost control, and for that I am truly sorry." His admission, laced with the bitter taste of regret, hung in the air as both a confession and an acknowledgement of his deep internal strife. Marcus, sitting across the table, leaned forward slightly. His gaze, calm yet unwavering, was a testament to the pain he had endured. In a quiet but firm voice, he said, "Richard, what you did was not just an act of anger. It was a betrayal of trust, of human decency. I was not merely a passenger on your bus. I was a person, a human being who deserved to be treated with respect. I hope you understand that your actions have consequences that reach far beyond a moment of anger." His words, gentle yet pointed, cut through the room's silence, challenging Richard to confront not only the immediate fallout, but the years of prejudice that had led him to this moment. As the conversation deepened, Evelyn revealed the contents of a report that had been compiled from anonymous accounts, internal memos, and even surveillance footage that chronicled more than just the morning's incident. "There are patterns here," she stated, "patterns of behavior that have gone unchecked. We have discovered that your performance, your interactions with passengers, have been part of a larger picture, a picture that includes not only your personal struggles, but also the darker aspects of how this company has operated under the guise of tradition and legacy." The revelation hit Richard like a tidal wave. His family's name, so carefully guarded and yet so inescapable, had cast a long shadow over his life. The very fact that he was born into the ownership of the transit company, a legacy he had tried so hard to ignore, was now laid bare as both a burden and a source of unspoken power. I always felt, I always felt like I was trapped, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Trapped between the man I wanted to be and the expectations of a family I never really understood. I wanted to be free, to live without the weight of legacy, but instead, I became a prisoner of my own anger. A murmur of understanding rippled through the room, as if every person present could feel the gravity of Richard's internal conflict. Marcus's eyes softened for a brief moment, though the pain remained evident. And in that anger, "You hurt someone who was trying to find his own way in this world," he said gently. "Our lives are not defined solely by our past or our family names, Richard. We have the power to choose who we become, even when the legacy we inherit seems too heavy to bear." The room was silent for long minutes as Richard's mind raced. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of disappointment, resolve, and cautious hope. Evelyn continued, "Richard, today is a turning point. You have the opportunity to make amends, not only by apologizing but by taking active steps to address the deep issues that led to this moment. You must face the truth about yourself, and in doing so, help us reshape the future of this company into one that truly reflects the values of respect and equality." In that charged atmosphere, a dramatic shift began to take shape. Richard looked around the table, his eyes finally meeting those of each person present. He realized that his legacy, the family name that had once seemed like an unchangeable fate, was not a chain but rather a call to action. A call to use the power he had inherited to make things right. His heart pounded as he spoke, voice trembling with both fear and newfound determination. "I understand now. I see that I have been blind to the harm I caused, not just to Marcus, but to everyone who rides our buses, who trusts us to treat them with dignity. I want to change. I want to use what I have been given to bring about change that matters." At that moment, the board's stern expressions began to soften, and even Marcus's guarded demeanor showed signs of cautious optimism. Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes filled with both relief and lingering skepticism. "It will not be easy, Richard," she warned. "But if you are sincere in your commitment to change, you must start by acknowledging that your actions are part of a larger system, a system of inherited privilege and unchecked prejudice. The first step is to confront your own inner demons and accept that the past, while unchangeable, does not have to dictate the future." The tension in the room gradually gave way to a dialogue that was both raw and transformative. Board members shared their own experiences and the challenges they had faced in maintaining the company's integrity in a world that was rapidly evolving. One by one, they spoke of the need for reform, of the necessity to build an organization that was as much about social justice as it was about profit and legacy. Their words, though measured, carried the force of conviction and the hope of a new beginning. Meanwhile, Marcus listened intently, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. He could see the turmoil, the bitter shame of past actions, and the tentative spark of genuine remorse. "I have spent so long feeling like an outsider," Marcus admitted quietly, "feeling as if the world had already decided who I was before I even had a chance to speak for myself. Today, I stand here not as a victim of your anger, but as a person who believes in the possibility of redemption. I want to see you change, Richard, not because I expect you to erase the past, but because I believe that every moment is a chance to make amends." The dialogue in that room grew more impassioned as the hours passed. Richard's voice, at times shaky and halting, gained strength as he recounted moments from his past, memories of a childhood filled with mixed emotions, of a family legacy that had both comforted and confined him. He spoke of the internal battles that had tormented him, the struggle to reconcile his own identity with the expectations imposed by a world that valued power over compassion. With every word, he peeled away layers of denial and fear, revealing the raw, vulnerable man beneath the hardened exterior of the bus driver. In one powerful exchange, Richard's voice broke as he said, "I have been running from my past, from the very essence of who I am. I was taught to believe that my worth was tied to my family's name, that the power we inherited was a shield against the world. But that shield became a weapon I used against those who did not look like me, who dared to remind me of the humanity I had long forgotten. His admission was a turning point, a moment of catharsis that resonated deeply with everyone in the room. A long silence followed, filled with the sound of a distant clock and the soft hum of the city outside. Then Evelyn spoke once more, her tone now imbued with cautious hope. "Richard, if you truly wish to begin this journey of redemption, you must not only apologize with words, but also take concrete actions. We are prepared to offer you a chance to lead an initiative within our company, a program designed to address systemic bias, to educate our staff, and to rebuild trust with our community. But know this, the road ahead will be long, and the process of healing is neither quick nor easy." Richard bowed his head, a single tear escaping down his cheek, as he whispered, "I will do it. I will do whatever it takes to make this right." His declaration was not just an acceptance of responsibility, but a promise to himself, to Marcus, and to everyone who had been hurt by his actions. In that moment, the room seemed to exhale, as if the heavy burden of past sins was beginning to lift, replaced by the tentative light of hope. As the meeting drew to a close, the board members and Marcus gathered around Richard, each offering words of support and cautious encouragement. The atmosphere was charged with a fragile optimism, a recognition that true transformation began with the willingness to confront one's own darkness. Outside the boardroom, the city continued its ceaseless rhythm. A reminder that while individual lives could change, the world around them was ever in flux, filled with both beauty and brokenness. In the days that followed, Richard set out on the arduous task of mending what had been shattered. He began by meeting with passengers he had once ignored, listening to their stories, and understanding the full extent of the hurt he had caused. He visited community centers, where he spoke candidly about his past, his mistakes, and his commitment to change. Each conversation, each shared moment of vulnerability, chipped away at the wall of prejudice that had long confined him, revealing the possibility of a new identity built on empathy rather than entitlement. Marcus, too, embarked on his own journey of healing. Though the pain of that morning could not be erased overnight, he found solace in knowing that his voice had been heard, that his experience had sparked a conversation that reached far beyond the confines of a bus ride. In quiet moments of reflection, he would ask himself, "What would I do if faced with the betrayal of someone I trusted?" His answer, though evolving, was a call to never remain silent in the face of injustice, to always demand accountability and truth. Richard's transformation was not linear. There were days when the old shadows crept back, moments when anger and self-doubt threatened to undermine the progress he had made. But with each setback came a renewed determination, a reminder that redemption was a journey marked by persistence and humility. He enrolled in workshops on diversity and inclusion, sought counsel from mentors who had themselves faced the harsh glare of public scrutiny, and most importantly, he listened. He listened to the quiet voices of those who had been marginalized, allowing their stories to reshape his understanding of power, privilege, and the true meaning of leadership. Months passed, and the city, ever watchful and unyielding, bore witness to the slow but unmistakable change in its people. Richard's initiative within the transit company blossomed into a program that not only reformed internal practices, but also forged stronger bonds between the company and the diverse communities it served. Regular training sessions replaced old habits, and dialogues that once were fraught with tension gradually gave way to honest exchanges of ideas and shared aspirations. In one of these sessions, as Richard addressed a small group of employees, he paused and asked softly, "Have any of you ever felt trapped by expectations that weren't truly your own? How did you find the courage to break free?" His question, posed with genuine curiosity, sparked an open and heartfelt conversation. A dialogue that acknowledged the pain of the past while offering a path toward a more compassionate future. The climax of this transformation came one brisk autumn evening when the company organized a community forum, a public gathering designed to bridge the gap between those who had once been divided by mistrust and resentment. The forum was held in a renovated transit hall, its walls now adorned with murals celebrating unity and resilience. Richard and Marcus found themselves standing side by side at the podium, an image that was both unexpected and powerful. For the first time, the man who had once been consumed by anger and prejudice now stood shoulder to shoulder with the man he had once hurt, their differences transformed into a shared commitment to healing. As the room filled with local residents, community leaders, and even some of the passengers whose lives had been touched by the company's service, Richard spoke with a calm sincerity that belied the turbulent path that had led him there. Tonight, we gather not as representatives of a legacy defined by silence and exclusion, but as a community bound by a commitment to change, he said, his voice steady and clear. I stand before you not as a perfect man, but as one who has learned that true strength lies in acknowledging our mistakes and working tirelessly to overcome them. Today, I ask for your forgiveness not merely in words, but in your willingness to join me on this journey toward a better future. Marcus, standing beside him, added quietly, I have experienced pain and betrayal, and I know how deep those wounds can run. But I also know that every day offers a chance to rebuild, to reshape our lives, and to redefine what it means to truly belong. Let tonight be a celebration of our resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, the promise of redemption can shine through. The applause that followed was not just a polite response, it was a cathartic outpouring of relief, hope, and the collective yearning for change. In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, as if every person present recognized the profound significance of what was unfolding. The public forum became a crucible for reflection, where stories of past pain merged with visions of a more inclusive future. Throughout the evening, the audience was invited to share their own experiences, to ask questions, and to reflect on the nature of trust, betrayal, and the possibility of forgiveness. As the night wore on and the forum drew to a close, Richard and Marcus stepped away from the podium, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. The cool night air wrapped around them as they walked slowly down the steps of the transit hall, the distant sounds of the city a gentle reminder that life continued beyond that transformative evening. In a quiet corner away from the prying eyes of the crowd, Richard turned to Marcus, his voice soft and laden with emotion. Thank you, he said simply, the words carrying the weight of his remorse, his gratitude, and his promise to change. Marcus regarded him for a long moment before replying, We both have a long road ahead, Richard, but if we can learn from our mistakes and honor the truth of who we are, then maybe our story can inspire others to do the same. In the reflective calm that followed, Richard found himself pondering the intricate tapestry of betrayal, trust, and redemption that had defined his recent journey. His mind wandered back to the first morning when he had been blinded by anger, to the painful realization that his actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a legacy steeped in contradiction and prejudice. He had spent so long hiding behind a facade of routine and duty, unaware that every decision he made carried the potential to either heal or further divide the world around him. Now, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Richard stood at the threshold of a new beginning. He knew that the scars of the past would not vanish overnight, and that the process of healing, both for himself and for the community, would be long and arduous. Yet, in the quiet moments of introspection that followed the dramatic events of the past months, he began to see that every act of betrayal, every moment of anger, held within it the seed of transformation. The journey toward redemption was not a linear path, but a winding road filled with setbacks, moments of despair, and the constant challenge of facing one's own weaknesses. In the soft glow of the morning, as Richard drove his bus along a familiar route that now felt charged with the promise of change, he found himself looking out the window with new eyes. The city, once a backdrop to his daily routine, had become a living mosaic of hope, struggle, and endless possibility. Every face he passed, every conversation overheard, was a reminder that the world was as complex as it was beautiful, and that every individual had the power to shape that beauty through compassion and understanding. That day, Richard made a promise not only to himself, but to every person whose life had been touched by his actions. He would dedicate himself to building bridges where there had once been walls, to listening when anger tempted him to shout, and to learning from mistakes of his past so that no one else would have to endure the sting of betrayal. In quiet moments at the end of his long shifts, he would reflect on the questions that had once tormented him, questions about identity, loyalty, and the cost of unchallenged power, and he would find in them the seeds of a more inclusive future. As the bus rolled to a gentle stop at a familiar corner, Richard stepped out and paused for a moment in the cool morning air. He thought of Marcus, the man who had been both a victim and an unlikely catalyst for his transformation, and wondered how many lives had been silently counting on him to rise above the shadows of his past. With a steadying breath, he resolved to use his newfound understanding to champion fairness, to speak up for those who had long been silenced by prejudice, and to honor the legacy of change that had been awakened by a single painful day. In the final moments of that long, transformative journey, Richard's thoughts turned outward, directly to those who might one day hear his story. What would you do, he silently asked, if you were faced with the truth of your own complicity in a system built on betrayal? How would you choose to act when every moment offered a chance to either perpetuate old wounds or to begin healing them? His unspoken questions echoed in the quiet of the early morning, inviting each listener to reflect on the nature of trust, the pain of betrayal, and the enduring possibility of redemption. And so, as the city awoke to a new day filled with both promise and uncertainty, Richard continued on his journey, not as a man defined by the sins of his past, but as one determined to forge a future built on honesty, empathy, and the courage to change. His story, intertwined with that of Marcus and countless others, became a quiet call to action for all who heard it, a call to look within, to acknowledge our shared humanity, and to strive for a world where every act of kindness and every step toward understanding helps mend the fractures of a divided past. Now, as you close the pages of this tale, take a moment to reflect on the lessons woven into its fabric. Consider the power of acknowledging one's mistakes and the strength it takes to seek redemption. Ask yourself, in moments of betrayal, when the truth of our actions confronts us with the consequences of our choices, how do we find the courage to change? Share your thoughts, your own stories of struggle and transformation. And let this narrative be a spark for conversation about the nature of loyalty, prejudice, and the hope that lies in every new beginning. What would you have done in the face of betrayal? And how might you choose to forgive both yourself and others as you move forward? In the quiet, unyielding light of a new dawn, the story of Richard and Marcus remains an open invitation, a reminder that every day offers a chance to rewrite our own narratives, to transform regret into redemption, and to build a future where trust is earned, compassion is shared, and the bonds that unite us prove stronger than the shadows of our past. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.